Step out of the vehicle. I won't ask twice. The flashlight beam cuts through the windshield like a blade. Blue and red lights pulse against the rearview mirror, painting the interior in alternating shades of warning. Ivory Mercer keeps her hands at 10 and 2. Old habit. The kind that lives in muscle memory, deeper than thought. In the back seat, 6-year-old Willow clutches her stuffed bear with whitening knuckles. Her eyes are wide, wet, catching the strobing lights. The officer outside raps his knuckles against the window, hard. The sound cracks through the quiet like a gunshot. "You deaf? I said out!" 20 minutes earlier, a woman named Heather Dunning had dialed 911 from her living room window. The call log would later show case number CD-2024-09127, duration 47 seconds, priority code 4, non-emergency. The dispatcher's recording captured every word. "There's a black vehicle. A vehicle with a black woman inside, parked at the end of my street for 10 minutes. She's just sitting there, with a child. It looks suspicious." "Is she threatening anyone, ma'am? Any weapons visible?" "No, but you don't understand. She doesn't belong here." Code 4, non-emergency. But Officer Bradley Voss arrived in 6 minutes flat. Now he stands beside the Honda Accord, one hand resting near his belt, the other aiming a flashlight directly into the driver's eyes. His body camera should be recording. The small red light that would indicate active status is dark. Ivory notices. She notices everything. The positioning of his feet, weight forward, ready to move. The angle of his shoulders, aggressive, not neutral. The way his partner's cruiser has pulled up behind, boxing her in. These are not the movements of a routine traffic stop. These are the movements of men who have already decided what happens next. What they don't know, what they couldn't possibly know, is that Ivory Mercer has spent her entire life watching people in uniform make decisions. Her father wore stars on his shoulders before she learned to walk. She grew up on 6 military bases in 7 years, learning to read power the way other children learn to read books. The officer thinks he's in control. He's wrong. "Mommy," Willow whispers from the back seat. "Why is he so mad at us?" Ivory doesn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she rolls down the window exactly 4 inches, enough to speak, not enough to reach through, and keeps her voice level. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" If you're hooked already, hit that subscribe button. This story is about to take a turn no one saw coming. 7 hours earlier, the morning had started like any other. Ivory woke at 5:47, 13 minutes before her alarm, same as always. The townhouse at 4152 Maple Court was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a child stirs, before the day begins its relentless forward march. She lay still for a moment, running through the mental checklist that had become as automatic as breathing. Willow's lunch, packed last night in the refrigerator, work clothes, laid out on the chair, pressed and ready, car keys on the hook by the door where they always hung. Some people called it obsessive. Ivory called it survival. She rose, showered in exactly 8 minutes, dressed in the dark to avoid waking Willow, and made her way downstairs. The kitchen smelled of the coffee she'd programmed to brew at 5:30. 1 cup, black, consumed standing at the counter while reviewing her schedule on her phone. At 6:15, she stepped outside to check the car. This was the part people didn't understand, the part that marked her as different, even among the careful. She walked a slow circle around the Honda Accord, checking each tire for pressure by sight, each light for function by pressing the brake and turning on the flashers. She opened the hood, verified the fluid levels, closed it with a soft click. Then she pulled a small notebook from her jacket pocket and wrote, 6:17 a.m. Vehicle check complete. The notebook was worn at the edges, filled with similar entries stretching back years. Every morning, every check, every notation. She'd started the habit at 14, the year her family moved to their 6th base in 7 years. Fort Campbell that time. Her father had been away more than home, deployed to places she wasn't supposed to know about, doing things that would never appear in any official record. Preparation is armor, he'd told her once, the rare weekend he was home. You can't control what happens, but you can control how ready you are when it does. She'd been ready ever since. At 6:45, Willow appeared in the kitchen doorway, pajamas rumpled, bear dangling from one hand. "Mommy, is today a pancake day?" Ivory smiled. "It's Thursday. What do we have on Thursday?" "Oatmeal." Willow made a face. "With the yucky raisins." "With the healthy raisins. Come on, let's get you dressed." The morning routine unfolded with military precision. Breakfast, teeth brushing, backpack check, hair in 2 neat braids that Willow insisted on inspecting in the mirror. By 7:30, they were in the car. By 7:35, Ivory had dropped Willow at Crestwood Elementary's before-school program. By 8, she was at her desk at Morrison & Hale Construction, the third-floor accounting office that smelled of old carpet and stale coffee. The workday passed in columns of numbers and the soft click of keyboard keys. Ivory kept her head down, her output high, her interactions minimal. She'd learned that formula early. In a world that already watched her more closely than it watched others, excellence was the only shield and silence the only strategy. At noon, her supervisor appeared at her cubicle. Raymond Cole was 53, white-haired, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once and now just looked tired. He'd hired Ivory 2 years ago, over objections from the senior partners that he'd never quite acknowledged, but also never quite hidden. "Mercer, got a minute?" She saved her spreadsheet and followed him to his office. "Close the door." The instruction sent a small pulse of alertness through her chest. Closed-door meetings were never good. She'd learned that in every workplace she'd ever entered. Raymond sat heavily behind his desk, rubbing his temples. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." Ivory remained standing. "Of course." "Have you noticed anyone giving you problems around the office?" The question was vague enough to mean anything, specific enough to mean something. "Problems how?" "Comments? Looks? Anything that makes you uncomfortable." She thought of the way Jerry from Permits always stopped talking when she entered the break room. The way Sandra from HR had asked, 3 times now, whether her hair was natural or a statement. The way the senior partners looked through her in meetings, as if she were furniture that happened to speak. "Nothing actionable," she said carefully. "Why do you ask?" Raymond sighed. "Someone left a note on my desk this morning, anonymous, suggesting that we should review the diversity hire's work more closely." He made air quotes around the words. "I threw it away, but I wanted you to know." Diversity hire. 2 words that erased 2 years of perfect performance reviews, 3 successful audits, 1 emergency weekend when she'd caught a billing error that would have cost the company 6 figures. "I appreciate you telling me," Ivory said. Her voice was calm. Inside, something tightened. "I don't know who sent it," Raymond continued, "but I want you to know, I'm watching, and I've got your back." She nodded, thanked him, and returned to her desk. She didn't believe him, not entirely. People always said they had your back, until having your back became inconvenient. She pulled out her notebook and made a small notation. 12:15 p.m., R. Cole, anonymous note re, diversity hire, no action taken. Documentation. Always documentation. At 3:15 she left work to pick up Willow. The elementary school parking lot was chaos as usual. SUVs jockeying for position, parents on phones, children spilling out of doors like water from a broken dam. Ivory arrived 10 minutes early, as always, and parked in the spot with the clearest sightline to both the main entrance and the side door. Old habit. Her father's voice in her head. Always know your exits. Willow appeared at 3:22, backpack bouncing, face split in a grin. "Mommy, look what I made!" She held up a watercolor painting, a house, 2 figures, one large, one small, and a green square in the corner. "What's the green part?" Ivory asked, buckling her in. "That's Grandpa's special room. where he has the important talks." Ivory paused. Willow had been to her grandfather's home exactly 4 times. The special room was his study, wood-paneled, lined with photographs of men in uniform, a framed flag and a shadow box on the wall. "That's a beautiful painting, baby. We'll put it on the refrigerator." "Can we call Grandpa tonight? I want to show him." "Maybe this weekend." Ivory started the car. "Grandpa's been busy." Busy was an understatement, but there was no way to explain to a 6-year-old what advisory capacity to the Senate Armed Services Committee meant, or why Grandpa's schedule was measured in security clearances and classified briefings rather than free time. They drove home through quiet streets lined with older homes, the kind of neighborhood real estate listings called established and character-filled. Crestwood County sat between Greensboro and Raleigh, far enough from both to have its own identity but close enough to feel their influence. Ivory had moved here 6 months ago, when the rent in Greensboro became impossible, and a coworker mentioned a townhouse opening on Maple Court. The neighborhood was mostly white, mostly older, mostly the kind of people who put American flags on their porches and watched who came and went. She'd known, moving in, that she'd be watched more closely than others, that her car would be noted, her visitors counted, her routines observed. This was the tax she paid for living in a nice neighborhood. The constant, exhausting awareness that her presence required justification in a way that others never did. Today, driving down Magnolia Lane toward her street, she passed the house at 4127. Heather Dunning was on her front porch. The woman was in her 50s, with the kind of blonde hair that came from a bottle and the kind of smile that came from practice. She served as the neighborhood watch coordinator, a volunteer position she'd held for 9 years, and wielded like a scepter. As Ivory's car passed, Heather raised a hand in greeting. The gesture was friendly. The eyes above it were not. Ivory waved back, kept driving, and felt the familiar weight of being seen. That evening, after dinner at the taco place on Main Street, she made the mistake that would change everything. She parked at the end of Magnolia Lane, 3 blocks from home, to answer a work email. The message was from Raymond, flagged urgent, a question about a vendor invoice that couldn't wait until morning. Ivory pulled over, put the car in park, and typed her response on her phone. It took 90 seconds, maybe less. In the back seat, Willow played a game on the tablet she was allowed during car rides. The sound effects were low, cheerful, oblivious. Ivory didn't see Heather Dunning watching from her front window, didn't see the phone lifted, the numbers dialed, the lips moving in quiet accusation. She finished her email, started the car, and pulled away. Behind her, in the house at 4127, Heather was already hanging up. "There's a black vehicle. A vehicle with a black woman inside." And somewhere across town, Officer Bradley Voss was receiving the dispatch. The flashlight beam didn't waver. "Broken tail light." Bradley Voss's voice carried the bored authority of someone who'd said similar words 1,000 times. "License and registration." Ivory's hands moved slowly, deliberately visible. She'd learned this choreography from her father before she learned to drive. Announce every movement, keep palms open, never reach without warning. "My license is in my purse on the passenger seat. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now." Voss didn't acknowledge the courtesy. He stood with one hand still near his belt, watching her like a hawk watches movement in grass. She retrieved the documents, handed them through the cracked window. He examined them for a long moment, flashlight sweeping from the license to her face and back again. Behind him, the second cruiser sat with its engine running. Inside, she could see another officer, younger, watching. "Mercer." Voss read the name like it tasted sour. "This your current address?" "Yes, sir. 4152 Maple Court." "Funny." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell stale coffee on his breath. "Someone reported a suspicious vehicle matching this description parked on Magnolia Lane." "That's not Maple Court. I was parked legally on a public street, answering a work email." "With a child in the back seat?" "My daughter, Willow. She's 6. Voss moved to the rear of the car, swept his flashlight across the back window. Willow shrank against the seat, pulling her bear to her chest. "Why's she back there alone while you're on your phone?" The question had nothing to do with taillights, nothing to do with the stated reason for the stop. Ivory felt the conversation shifting, tilting toward something darker. "She wasn't alone. I was in the vehicle with her." Looked alone from where I was standing. This was the trap. She recognized it now. The slow construction of a narrative that had nothing to do with reality and everything to do with control. Whatever happened next, his report would say what he wanted it to say. "Officer, I'd like to understand the procedure here." She kept her voice calm, professional. "You stopped me for a broken taillight. My taillights are functional. I checked them this morning." Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe. Or the recognition that this wasn't going the way he'd expected. "Are you arguing with me?" "I'm asking a question." "Well, here's my answer." He stepped back toward the door, one hand now definitively on his belt. "Step out of the vehicle." "May I ask?" "Step out." The second officer had emerged from his cruiser now, younger, with the eager tension of someone still proving himself. His nameplate read, Stokes. Ivory looked at Willow in the rearview mirror. The child's face was a mask of fear she was trying to hide, lower lip trembling. "My daughter is frightened. If I step out, may I speak to her first?" "You can speak to her from outside the car. Move." She opened the door slowly, keeping her movements deliberate, broadcasting every action like a telegraph. 2 steps forward. Turned to face the vehicle, hands visible at her sides. Voss was behind her now, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. "Hands on the hood." "Officer, hands on the hood, now." She complied. The metal was cold through the fabric of her blouse. Behind her, she heard Willow's voice, high and thin. "Mommy? Mommy?" "It's okay, baby." She made herself sound calm. "Mommy's just talking to the police officers. Stay in your seat." Voss moved closer. Voss moved. She felt his hand on her back. Not a pat-down, just pressure, dominance. "I'm going to search your vehicle." "Do you have a warrant?" "Don't need one. Probable cause." "What probable cause?" The hand on her back pressed harder. His voice dropped low, meant only for her. "Lady, you want to do this the easy way or the hard way? Because I've got all night, and something tells me you don't." 20 feet away, a street sign stood at the corner of Magnolia Lane. It read, "Public parking, no permit required, maximum 4 hours." She'd been parked for 12 minutes. "Officer, I was parked on a public street within the posted time limit. My vehicle is registered, my license is valid, and I haven't been informed of any traffic violation that would warrant a search." Sounds like law school talk. His voice carried amusement now, the satisfaction of someone who believed he held all the cards. "You a lawyer?" "I'm a citizen who knows her rights." "Yeah?" Voss moved around her, positioning himself between her and the car. "Well, I'm a cop who knows what I smell." "And what do you smell?" "Suspicion." The second officer, Stokes, approached. His body camera, unlike Voss's, showed a steady red light. Recording. "What do we have here, Voss?" "Uncooperative subject. Possible child endangerment." The words hit like a physical blow. Ivory felt her heart rate spike, forced it down. "Child endangerment?" She kept her voice level. "On what basis?" Stokes pulled out a small notebook, flipping pages with theatrical slowness. "North Carolina General Statute 14-318.2. Leaving a child unattended in a vehicle in a manner that creates a risk of harm. My daughter was not unattended. I was in the vehicle with her." That's not how Officer Voss remembers it. His memory is incorrect. Stokes looked at Voss. Voss looked at Stokes. Some silent communication passed between them. "Ma'am," Stokes continued, "are you refusing to cooperate with a lawful order?" "I'm exercising my Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure. I do not consent to a search of my vehicle." This story is just getting started. If you want to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Voss stepped closer. Lady, I'm going to give you one more chance. Step aside. Let us search the vehicle. We'll be done in 5 minutes, and you can be on your way. And if I refuse? Then this gets a lot more complicated for everyone, including your daughter. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Ivory looked at her car, at Willow's tear-streaked face pressed against the window, at the 2 officers who had already decided how this would end. She thought about compliance, about smiling, stepping aside, letting them paw through her belongings while her child watched, about the quiet submission that might make this end faster. Then she thought about her father, about the stories he'd told her, carefully censored for civilian ears, about men who abused power because no one stopped them, about the look in his eyes when he said, "The moment you let them take something from you that isn't theirs to take, you'll never get it back." "I do not consent," she said again. "If you search my vehicle without my consent or a warrant, I will be filing a formal complaint with your department and the State Attorney General's office." Voss's face went red. What happened next happened fast. His hand closed around her arm. Not the light touch of guidance, but the grip of restraint. Hard, painful. "That's it. You're under arrest." "For what?" "Resisting a lawful order. Obstruction of justice." He yanked her around, pushing her against the hood of the car. "And if you don't shut up, I'll add assaulting an officer." "I haven't touched you." "Your word against mine." The cold metal of handcuffs closed around her wrists. Not the quick professional application of trained procedure, but slow, deliberately tight, the metal biting into skin. Willow was screaming now. The sound cut through the night like a blade. "Mommy! Mommy! No!" Ivory turned her head, trying to see her daughter through the glass. "Willow, baby, listen to me. Listen. Mommy needs you to be brave. Can you do that? Can you be brave for Mommy?" The child's sobs continued, but she nodded. "Good girl. I need you to stay in the car. Don't move. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll come back for you, I promise." Voss pulled her upright, steering her toward his cruiser. "Touching," he muttered. "Real touching." As they passed Stokes, the younger officer spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, we have a juvenile at the scene. Request Child Protective Services for welfare check." The words turned Ivory's blood to ice. "My daughter is fine. She's in a car seat, with entertainment, waiting for me to drive her home." "Can't leave a kid unattended at a crime scene." Stokes's voice was flat, procedural. "Policy." "This isn't a crime scene." "It is now." They reached the cruiser. Voss opened the back door, hand on the top of her head. The gesture every cop show had made familiar. The gesture that transformed a citizen into a suspect. "Watch your head." He didn't wait for her to duck, just pushed. Her temple caught the doorframe. Not hard enough to cut, but hard enough to sting. Hard enough to be deliberate. She fell into the back seat, hands cuffed behind her, head throbbing, and looked back at her car. Willow's face was pressed against the window. Even from here, Ivory could see the tears streaming down her cheeks, the mouth opening and closing around words she couldn't hear. The door slammed shut. From the corner of Magnolia Lane, Heather Dunning watched. She stood on the sidewalk now, having emerged from her house the moment the lights appeared. Her phone was in her hand, recording. "Good," she murmured to herself. "Good." She'd known, from the moment that woman moved into the neighborhood, that something like this would happen. People like that always caused trouble. It was just a matter of time. Now she had proof. She watched the cruiser pull away, watched the second officer approach the Honda with the screaming child inside, watched the whole righteous machinery of order asserting itself. Tomorrow, she would tell everyone what she'd seen. The dangerous woman, the neglected child, the brave officers who'd intervened. The story would grow with each telling, accumulating details that hadn't happened and losing ones that had. By week's end, the neighborhood would know. Heather Dunning smiled and went back inside to make tea. The Crestwood County Police Station sat at the edge of town, a 2-story brick building with an American flag hanging limp in the windless night. Inside, fluorescent lights cast everything in the greenish pallor of institution. Ivory sat in a metal chair, hands still cuffed, watching the booking process unfold around her. Fingerprints, pressed hard enough to leave bruises. Photo, 4 takes, each time the sergeant claiming technical difficulties. Personal property, dumped unceremoniously onto a scarred wooden counter, each item catalogued with deliberate slowness. She read the inventory list before signing. Item 1, Apple iPhone 13, black case. Item 2, brown leather wallet. Item 3, vehicle keys, Honda Accord 2019. The phone. They didn't know about the voice memo app running in the background. 18 minutes and 43 seconds of continuous audio, automatically backed up to cloud storage. They thought they'd taken her evidence. They'd only made a copy. "I'm entitled to a phone call," she said when the booking was complete. "Georgia Code 42-4-52, within reasonable time after booking." The desk sergeant, nameplate reading price, looked up from his paperwork. "When we're ready." "The statute specifies within reasonable time. It's been 45 minutes. "We'll get to it." First violation. She filed it away. An hour later, they led her to a holding cell at the back of the station. The space was small, concrete, with a metal bench along one wall and a toilet in the corner with no privacy screen. "Your daughter's been picked up by Child Protective Services," Voss said as she entered. "Just so you know." The words hit like physical blows. She was safe in the car at a crime scene with a parent under arrest. He shrugged. "DSS makes the call, not us. I want to call my emergency contact. I want to know where my daughter is being taken." "Like I said." Voss stepped back, hand on the cell door. "When we're ready." The door slammed shut. The lock engaged with a sound like finality. Ivory didn't sleep. She sat on the metal bench, back against the concrete wall, and ran through everything that had happened. Every word, every action, every procedural violation. The stop itself, pretextual, based on a false taillight claim. The search demand, no probable cause articulated, no consent given. The arrest, for resisting what had been an unlawful order. The phone call denial. Ongoing, now approaching 3 hours. The threat about her daughter. Leverage, designed to break her. In the silence of the holding cell, she began to speak. Quietly, just above a whisper, creating a verbal record. October 8th, approximately 11:45 p.m., currently in Crestwood County Police Holding Facility. Arrested by Officer Bradley Voss and Officer Connor Stokes, approximately 3 hours ago. No formal charges read beyond verbal accusation of resisting arrest and obstruction. Phone call not yet permitted despite multiple requests citing statute. She continued for 10 minutes, documenting every detail she could remember. The words disappeared into the air, heard by no one, recorded by nothing. But if she said them enough times, in enough detail, they would survive in her memory. And memory, properly preserved, could become testimony. Her father had taught her that too. At 2:15 a.m., footsteps approached. Not the heavy boots of a patrol officer. Something different. Deliberate. Confident. The cell door opened. A man stood in the doorway, older than Voss, with sergeant stripes on his sleeve and a nameplate reading, Pruitt. His face had the practiced neutrality of someone who'd learned to keep expressions locked away. "Ms. Mercer." His voice was mild, almost friendly. "I'm Sergeant Floyd Pruitt. I understand there's been some confusion about your situation." Ivory stayed on the bench. "No confusion. Your officers made an unlawful stop and an unlawful arrest." "That's one interpretation." Pruitt stepped into the cell, not closing the door behind him. "There are others." "Such as?" Such as... He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, consulting it with theatrical slowness. A concerned citizen reported a suspicious vehicle. Officers responded. The driver became uncooperative. Standard escalation. I was parked legally on a public street, answering a work email with my daughter in the back seat. That's not suspicious. That's Tuesday. Pruitt smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Here's the thing, Ms. Mercer. Charges are serious. Resisting arrest, obstruction, those can follow you. Affect your employment. Affect your custody situation. The last two words landed exactly where he'd aimed them. My custody situation is not in question. Not yet. He tucked the paper away. But if DSS opens an investigation, these things have a way of getting complicated. She understood now. This was the offer. The informal, undocumented offer that would never appear in any record. What do you want? Nothing complicated. You drop the attitude. Stop talking about lawsuits and complaints. Accept that tonight was a misunderstanding, and we all move on. And if I don't? Pruitt's smile widened. Then we let the system work. Charges get filed. Reports get written. Witnesses get interviewed. He paused. Your neighbor, Ms. Dunning. She's very concerned about what she saw tonight. Very concerned about that child left alone in the car. I was in the car. That's not what she saw. Another pause. That's not what the officers saw. That's not what the report will say. The threat was naked now. Cooperate or be buried. Ivory looked at Pruitt, at his careful posture, his measured words, his confidence that this would work the way it always worked. And she made a decision. I'd like my phone call now. Is that a yes to my offer? It's a request for my legally mandated phone call, under Georgia Code 42-4-52. The smile disappeared. Have it your way, Ms. Mercer. He turned and left. The door stayed open for 3 seconds, long enough for her to see the hallway camera's red recording light, before slamming shut. They gave her the phone call at 6:15 a.m. Not to a lawyer, not to her father. She'd thought about it during the long hours of the night, running scenarios, calculating risks. If she called a lawyer, the process would begin. Formal, slow. Months of motions and hearings while her life hung suspended. If she called her father, he would act, immediately, decisively. But his involvement would escalate everything, turn a local incident into something national. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So she called Priscilla Wyatt. Priscilla was 68, a retired teacher who'd lived next door to Ivory's old apartment in Greensboro. She was the closest thing Ivory had to family in this state, a woman who'd watched Willow during emergencies, who'd brought soup when they had the flu, who asked for nothing and offered everything. The phone rang twice. Hello? Priscilla, it's Ivory. A pause. In that pause, Ivory heard the older woman waking fully, processing, understanding that a call at this hour meant crisis. What happened? I was arrested last night. Willow was taken by DSS. Good Lord. I need you to find her. I need you to make sure she's safe. They won't tell me where she is. Of course I'll find her. Priscilla's voice was steady now, practical. What do you need me to do? There should be emergency contact information on file at her school. My name, your name. DSS might have placed her in temporary foster care, but if you can get to her as a known contact, I'll handle it. Don't you worry about Willow. You worry about yourself. Ivory closed her eyes. Thank you. What happened, baby? What really happened? They stopped me for a broken taillight. The taillight wasn't broken. Silence on the line. The kind of silence that carries understanding too heavy for words. I'll find her, Priscilla said finally. And Ivory, don't let them break you. You hear me? Whatever they try, don't let them break you. The line went dead. Ivory handed the phone back to the officer who'd been watching. Stokes, from the night before, now looking tired and less eager. That's your one call. I'm aware. They led her back to the holding cell. The sun was coming up now, thin gray light seeping through the high window. Somewhere, her daughter was waking in a strange bed, surrounded by strange faces, wondering where her mother had gone. Ivory sat on the metal bench and waited. The release came at 11:47 a.m., roughly 17 hours after the arrest. No formal charges would be filed at this time. The phrase was repeated 3 times, by 3 different people, with varying degrees of smug satisfaction. The DA's office would review the incident. She was free to go pending further investigation. They returned her belongings in a plastic bag: phone, wallet, keys. The phone showed 47 missed calls. Priscilla, 12. Work, 8. Unknown numbers, 27. And buried in the notifications, a text from Priscilla sent at 8:22 a.m. Found her. She's safe. DSS placed her with me as emergency contact. Come when you can. Relief crashed through her like a wave. Willow was safe. Willow was with Priscilla. The worst possibility hadn't happened. She walked out of the police station into harsh midday light. The parking lot was nearly empty. Her car was nowhere to be seen. Impounded, probably, evidence in a crime that hadn't actually occurred. Priscilla's ancient Buick sat by the curb, engine running. The older woman stepped out as Ivory approached. She didn't say anything, just opened her arms. Ivory walked into them. "Is she okay?" "She's scared. She's asking for you. But she's okay." "Where?" "At my house, waiting." They drove in silence. The streets of Crestwood looked different in daylight. Ordinary, unremarkable. The same streets she'd driven 100 times without incident. But something had shifted. The ordinary had become hostile. The unremarkable now watched her with suspicious eyes. Priscilla's house was a small Cape Cod on a quiet street in Greensboro, 30 minutes from Crestwood. Ivory had barely put the car in park before the front door flew open and Willow came running out. "Mommy!" Ivory dropped to her knees on the lawn, catching her daughter in an embrace so tight it probably hurt. "I'm here, baby. Mommy's here. They took me away. They said you were in trouble. I was so scared." I know, but it's over now. Mommy's here." She held Willow for a long time, kneeling on the grass, letting the child's sobs gradually quiet into hiccups and then into silence. When she finally looked up, Priscilla was standing on the porch, watching with wet eyes. "Come inside," the older woman said. "I'll make tea." The next 3 days passed in a strange suspension. Ivory didn't go to work, couldn't really, with no car and a daughter too traumatized to leave her side. She called Raymond Cole on Monday morning, explained only that there had been a family emergency. His response was professional, sympathetic, and carefully distant. "Take the time you need. We'll manage." She heard what he didn't say. "This changes things." On Monday evening she retrieved her car from the impound lot. The fee was $247, paid in cash because they didn't accept cards from individuals with pending criminal status. Her car had been searched, thoroughly, if the disorder of the glove compartment was any indication. They'd found nothing, of course. There was nothing to find. On Tuesday, she took Willow to school for the first time since the arrest. The drop-off line felt different now. Other parents' eyes sliding toward her, then quickly away. Someone had talked. In a town like Crestwood, everyone always talked. On Wednesday, she went back to work. The office was quiet when she arrived. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that falls when everyone has been talking and suddenly stops. Raymond appeared at her cubicle within 20 minutes. "Can I see you in my office?" She followed him, closed the door without being asked. "Ivory." He sat heavily behind his desk, not meeting her eyes. "I heard about what happened." "What did you hear?" "That you were arrested, Friday night. Something about your daughter." "I was arrested on fabricated charges after a pretextual traffic stop. My daughter was taken by DSS as a pressure tactic. All charges have been dropped." Raymond winced. The thing is, some of the clients have concerns. What concerns? You handle financial records, sensitive information. If there's any question about your judgment, your stability... He trailed off, finally looking at her. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm telling you what I'm hearing. Ivory felt the ground shifting beneath her. She'd known this was coming, had prepared for it during the long hours of the weekend, but knowing didn't make it easier. So what happens now? Administrative leave, paid, until this situation is resolved. Resolved how? I don't know. He spread his hands helplessly. I'm trying to protect you, Ivory, and the company. This is the best I can do. She stood. I understand. Do you? You're covering yourself. I don't blame you. She turned to leave. At the door, she paused. Raymond? For what it's worth, I've given this company 2 years of perfect work. Not one error, not one complaint. And the moment something happens to me, I become the problem. Ivory, I'm not angry. I'm just making sure you know that I know. She walked out, collected her personal items from her desk, and left the building. By the time she reached her car, she was already planning the next step. The Internal Affairs Division of the Crestwood County Police Department occupied a small suite on the second floor of the county administration building, deliberately separate from the main station, though everyone knew the separation was cosmetic. Ivory arrived at 9 a.m. on Thursday, 1 week after the arrest. She carried a folder. Inside, her written complaint, a detailed timeline of events, a list of potential witnesses, and the transcript she'd made of her own verbal documentation from the holding cell. She did not include the audio recording from her phone, not yet. The waiting room was empty. A receptionist directed her to a plastic chair and told her someone would be with her shortly. 30 minutes passed. At 9:32, a door opened. Ms. Mercer? The woman who emerged was in her early 40s, with short-cropped natural hair, dark skin, and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Her badge read, Detective Tabitha Crane, Internal Affairs. I'm Detective Crane. I'll be handling your complaint. Ivory stood, extended her hand. Crane's grip was firm, professional. Thank you for seeing me. They walked to a small interview room. Crane gestured to a chair. Ivory sat. Before we begin, Crane said, I want to be clear about what this process is and isn't. I investigate complaints. I gather evidence. I make recommendations. I don't make final decisions on discipline. That's the chief's call. I understand. Good. Crane pulled out a notepad. Now, tell me what happened. Ivory began at the beginning. The 911 call she'd later learned about. The traffic stop. The false taillight claim. The demand to search. The arrest. The hours without a phone call. Pruitt's visit. The threats about her daughter. She spoke for 20 minutes without interruption. When she finished, Crane was quiet for a moment. You've documented all of this? Everything I could. Ivory pushed the folder across the table. Timeline, witnesses, relevant statutes. Crane opened the folder, scanned the contents. Her eyebrows rose slightly. This is thorough. I was raised to document everything. Military family? Ivory hesitated. What makes you say that? The organization, the precision, the way you're treating this like an after-action report. Crane looked up. I transferred from Charlotte-Mecklenburg 2 years ago. Before that, I was Army CID, Criminal Investigation Command. I know the style. Something shifted in the room. A recognition. A connection. My father served. What branch? Army. Crane nodded, returned to the folder. She spent several minutes reading, occasionally making notes. When she finally looked up, her expression was carefully neutral. Ms. Mercer, I'm going to be honest with you. I've seen this pattern before. Pretextual stops, manufactured charges, coordinated reports. It's hard to prove and even harder to discipline. I'm aware. The officers will say they acted in good faith, that your behavior was suspicious, that they were protecting a child. Their union will back them. The DA will be reluctant to pursue charges against cops. I'm aware of that too. Crane studied her. So why are you here? Because even if nothing happens to them, I want it on record. I want the pattern documented, so that the next person they do this to has something to point to. A long pause. Most people don't think that way, Crane said finally. Most people just want it to go away. I can't make it go away, but I can make it count. Crane closed the folder. I'll look into it, thoroughly. But I want you to understand, even with everything you've given me, the most likely outcome is insufficient evidence to sustain the complaint. That's not justice. That's the system protecting itself. I know. And you're still going forward? I am. Crane stood, extended her hand again. Ms. Mercer? This time, the way she said the name was different, weighted with something that might have been respect. I'll be in touch. 2 days later, Ivory received a call from a number she didn't recognize. Miss Mercer, this is Ronan Weeks. I'm a reporter with the Piedmont Observer. She almost hung up. Press meant attention. Attention meant escalation. She'd been trying to keep things contained, manageable, but something made her pause. How did you get my number? I have sources. Ms. Mercer, I've been investigating the Crestwood County Police Department for 2 years. Complaints filed, complaints dismissed. A pattern that keeps repeating. What does that have to do with me? I heard about your case, the traffic stop, the arrest, the DSS involvement. A pause. I've heard about 6 cases like yours in the last 24 months. All of them were black residents. All of them were administratively closed without action. Ivory was quiet. I'm not asking you to go on camera, Weeks continued. I'm not asking you to be the face of anything. I'm asking if you'd be willing to talk to me, background only. Help me understand the pattern. She thought about her father's advice, about not drawing attention, about letting systems work, about the costs of becoming visible. Then she thought about Willow, about the terror in her daughter's eyes, about the cold metal of handcuffs and the colder smile of Sergeant Pruitt. Background only? Your name doesn't appear without your explicit consent. When do you want to meet? They met 2 days later at a coffee shop in Raleigh, far enough from Crestwood to avoid familiar faces. Ronan Weeks was younger than she'd expected, early 30s, white, with the kind of intense focus that suggested either dedication or obsession, possibly both. He ordered coffee, she ordered tea. They sat in a corner booth, voices low. Let me show you what I've found, Weeks said, pulling out a tablet. 6 complaints in 24 months, all black residents, all initially charged with resisting arrest or obstruction. All charges eventually dropped or dismissed. All complaints against officers closed without disciplinary action. He showed her names, dates, incident summaries. And there's one name that appears in 4 of these 6 cases. He turned the tablet toward her. Officer Bradley Voss. He's been the arresting officer in 4 similar incidents, Weeks continued. All traffic stops, all in Crestwood County, all following complaints from residents about suspicious activity. Ivory looked at the information, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. Why hasn't anyone done anything? Because each case, individually, looks defensible. Officer discretion, conflicting accounts, insufficient evidence. It's only when you put them together that the pattern becomes obvious. So why are you telling me this? Weeks leaned forward. Because your case is the strongest. You documented everything. You filed the complaint immediately. You have witnesses, a timeline, and... He paused, looking at her closely. I'm guessing you have something else. Something you haven't shown IA yet. Ivory kept her expression neutral. What makes you say that? Because you're too calm, too prepared. You walked into that police station like someone who was ready for a fight, not someone who just wanted to complain and go home. She didn't answer. "Ms. Mercer, I'm not going to push, but if you have something, evidence that could break this case open, I want you to know that I can help protect it. Document its existence. Make sure it doesn't disappear." She thought about the audio file. 18 minutes and 43 seconds. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "But for now, this conversation stays off the record." "Understood." They talked for another hour. Weeks told her about the other cases, the names, the circumstances, the outcomes. He explained how pattern of practice investigations worked, how federal involvement could change the equation, how public attention sometimes forced movement when internal processes failed. When they parted, Ivory felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly, but possibility. 6 days after meeting Ronan Weeks, Ivory's life exploded again. It was a Tuesday morning, 6:47 a.m. She was making Willow's breakfast, oatmeal with the yucky raisins, when the knock came. Not a knock, a pounding. "Crestwood County Police!" "Open the door." Willow dropped her spoon. Her face went white. "Mommy." "Go to your room, baby." Ivory's voice was calm, absolutely calm. "Close the door. Don't come out until I say." "Mommy, I'm scared." "I know. But Mommy needs you to be brave. Can you do that for me? Can you be my brave girl?" Willow nodded, tears already streaming, and ran. Ivory walked to the door. Through the peephole she saw Bradley Voss, Connor Stokes, and 2 people in civilian clothes, one carrying a clipboard, one wearing a lanyard that read DSS. She opened the door. Voss smiled. "Ivory Mercer, you're under arrest for terroristic threats and intimidation of a witness." "Terroristic threats against whom?" "You contacted a member of the media with intent to defame law enforcement officers. North Carolina General Statute 14-277.1. The law didn't work that way. She knew it. They probably knew it too. But that wasn't the point. The point was this moment, this fear, this power. "I'd like to see a warrant." Voss produced a folded paper. She took it, scanned the contents. Her name, her address, a list of charges that read like creative fiction. Behind her, she heard the DSS worker speaking. "Ma'am, we have a report of a child in an unsafe environment. We're going to need to—" "You do not touch my daughter without a court order." "Ma'am, if you interfere with a child welfare check—" Ivory turned. The DSS worker, young, white, nervous, took a step back. "My daughter is in her room. She is 6 years old. She is traumatized from the last time your officers took her mother away. If you attempt to remove her without a court order authorizing emergency custody, I will file a federal civil rights lawsuit against you, your agency, and this county before the sun goes down." Silence. Then Voss grabbed her arm. "Enough talk. Turn around." She didn't resist. That was important. No resistance. No ammunition for their reports. She placed her hands behind her back, felt the cold metal close around her wrists again. But before they could move her toward the door, she spoke loudly, clearly, toward the hallway where she knew her daughter was listening. "Willow, call Grandpa. You remember the number?" A small voice from behind the closed door. "Yes, Mommy." "Good girl. Call him now." Voss yanked her toward the exit. "Who's Grandpa? Another lawyer?" Ivory didn't answer. She didn't need to. We're just getting to the best part. Subscribe now if you want to see how this ends. The holding cell looked the same as before. Same concrete walls, same metal bench, same toilet in the corner with no privacy. But something was different this time. Ivory wasn't scared anymore. She was angry. Not the hot, reactive anger that clouded judgment. The cold, clear anger that sharpened focus. The anger that came from knowing you'd done nothing wrong and being punished anyway. The anger that came from watching people with power use that power to destroy people without it. She sat on the bench, back straight, and began to speak aloud. October 22nd, approximately 7:15 a.m., Second arrest in 14 days. Charges: terroristic threats and intimidation of a witness. Arresting officers: Bradley Voss and Connor Stokes. DSS, representative present. Attempted child removal without court order. No verbal resistance from subject. Subject compliant with all physical directives. Handcuffs applied at 7:19 a.m., tighter than standard, noted for potential excessive force claim. She continued for 10 minutes. Documenting, recording. Building the case that would outlast whatever they tried next. At 9:47 a.m., the cell door opened. Captain Gaston Rowe stood in the doorway. He was older than the others, mid-50s, with silver hair cut military short and the posture of someone who'd spent years standing at attention. His uniform was crisp, his expression controlled. "Ms. Mercer, I'm Captain Rowe." "I know who you are." He stepped into the cell, not closing the door. The gesture was calculated, accessible, non-threatening, a negotiator's entrance. "I understand there's been some escalation in your situation. Is that what you call wrongful arrest?" He smiled slightly. "I call it a complicated case with multiple perspectives." "There's nothing complicated about it. Your officers fabricated charges to retaliate against me for filing an IA complaint and speaking to a reporter. That's one interpretation. It's the accurate interpretation." Rowe pulled a folding chair from against the wall, set it facing her, and sat. The move was deliberate, lowering himself to her level, reducing the physical hierarchy. "Ms. Mercer, I've reviewed your background. Military family, correct? Father served?" "Yes. I was an MP for 12 years. Fort Hood, Fort Benning. I know the type. Dependents who grow up thinking the rules don't apply to them because daddy wears stars." Ivory felt something tighten in her chest. He'd done his research. "My father's service has nothing to do with whether your officers violated my civil rights." "Your civil rights?" A small laugh, without warmth. "Ms. Mercer, let's be direct. You were arrested for legitimate charges, twice now. The DA is reviewing the case. You can make this drag on for months, years maybe, or you can cooperate." "Cooperate how?" "Withdraw your IA complaint. Issue a statement saying this was a misunderstanding. Stop talking to the press." He leaned forward. "And you can go home to your daughter today." The offer hung in the air. Compliance for freedom. Silence for peace. "And if I refuse?" Rowe's eyes went flat. "Then this gets messier. For everyone." A pause. "Including Willow." The threat was naked now, undisguised. Ivory looked at him, at his pressed uniform, his controlled expression, his confidence that this would work the way it always worked. And she made her choice. "I'd like my phone call now." "That's not an answer to my offer." "Yes, it is." Rowe studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of doubt. "Who are you going to call? Your lawyer? The reporter?" Ivory smiled. For the first time since this had begun, she smiled. "My father." The number was one she'd memorized at 12 years old. Not his regular phone, not even his personal cell. A number that bypassed switchboards and secretaries and routed through systems she didn't fully understand. It rang twice. "Ivory?" Her father's voice, deep, calm, immediately alert. The voice of a man who'd commanded tens of thousands of soldiers, who'd sat in rooms where decisions were made that shaped the course of nations. "Dad, I need your help." She heard him moving, closing a door. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Tell me." She told him. Everything. The traffic stop. The first arrest. The charges, dropped and then refiled. The DSS threats. The emails. The pattern. The retaliation. The captain sitting in his office upstairs, thinking he held all the cards. When she finished, silence. Not confused silence, not angry silence. The silence of assessment, of calculation, of a man deciding how to apply force. The captain's name? Gaston Rowe. He said he was MP at Fort Hood. Rowe. A pause. I know that name. 2008, 2009. There was an incident. Covered up, but I remember. Does that matter? It might. Another pause. Ivory, listen carefully. Say nothing else to them. Sign nothing. Agree to nothing. I'll handle it. Dad. I'll handle it. The line went dead. Ivory handed the phone back to the officer who'd been watching. The man looked bored. He had no idea what had just been set in motion. She walked back to her cell, sat on the metal bench, and waited. 3 hours later, Captain Rowe's desk phone rang. The phone on Captain Gaston Rowe's desk didn't ring often. Not this phone. The one with the unlisted number, the one that bypassed the switchboard, the one that existed for calls that couldn't go through normal channels. He stared at it for 3 rings before picking up. Captain Rowe. Captain, this is Angela Westbrook, Office of the Attorney General, North Carolina. The coffee cup in his left hand tilted. Brown liquid splashed across the papers on his desk. The AG's office? That's correct. I'm calling regarding case file CR20241847, a Ms. Ivory Mercer, currently in your custody. Rowe set down the cup with exaggerated care. His mind was already racing, trying to calculate how a routine arrest had reached the State Attorney General's office in less than 4 hours. What about her? We've received inquiries. Westbrook's voice was crisp, professional, the kind of voice that delivered bad news without flinching. From the Senate Armed Services Committee, and from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The Senate? What are you talking about? Captain, are you aware of Ms. Mercer's family connections? The question hung in the air like a blade. She mentioned her father served in the military. Her father is Lieutenant General Solomon Mercer, U.S. Army, retired, former commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division, current senior advisor to the Senate Armed Services Committee. A pause. He has friends in places that make my office look like a local traffic court. Rowe's throat went dry. We had no way of knowing. That's not my concern, Captain. My concern is that a federal preliminary review has been initiated regarding your department's handling of Ms. Mercer's case. Both incidents. I strongly suggest you review your procedures before this escalates further. What does that mean? What review? It means, Captain, that whatever you thought you were doing with this woman, you need to stop doing it. Immediately. Unless you want federal investigators going through your department with a fine-tooth comb. The line went dead. Rowe sat motionless for a full minute, staring at the phone as if it might explode. Then he stood, walked to his window, and looked down at the parking lot. 2 black SUVs with federal plates were pulling in. If you thought Part 1 was intense, you haven't seen anything yet. Subscribe now. This is where everything changes. The cell door opened at 11:23 a.m. Not Rowe this time. Not Voss or Stokes or Pruitt. A woman Ivory didn't recognize. Middle-aged, white, in a business suit rather than a uniform. Ms. Mercer, I'm Deputy District Attorney Patricia Hammond. You're being released. All charges have been dropped. Ivory didn't move. Just like that? Just like that. Hammond's expression was unreadable. You're free to go. Your personal property is waiting at the front desk. What about my daughter? DSS has withdrawn the welfare inquiry. No further action will be taken. Ivory stood slowly, not trusting the sudden shift. 20 minutes ago, Rowe had been threatening to destroy her life. Now she was being released with dropped charges and apologies. Something had happened. Something big. She followed Hammond through the corridors, past officers who wouldn't meet her eyes, past Sergeant Pruitt pretending to study paperwork, past the booking desk, where the same sergeant who'd processed her now handed back her belongings with trembling hands. Outside, the sun was harsh after hours of fluorescent light. She blinked, adjusting. And then she saw him. A black sedan sat at the curb, engine running. Beside it stood a man in civilian clothes, tall, silver-haired, with shoulders that still held military posture even in his 60s. Lieutenant General Solomon Mercer, United States Army, retired. Her father. "Hey, sweetheart." She didn't run to him, didn't cry. That wasn't how they'd been raised, either of them. She walked across the parking lot with measured steps and stopped 1 pace away. "You came." "Of course I came. I told you not to get involved unless it was necessary." He smiled slightly. "It became necessary." She looked back at the police station. Through the glass doors, she could see officers watching. Rowe stood at an upper window, phone pressed to his ear, face pale even from this distance. "What did you do?" "Made some calls. Reminded some people that actions have consequences." His smile faded. "They picked the wrong family to target, Ivory. Now they're going to learn exactly how wrong." He opened the car door for her. "Come on, let's go get Willow." The drive to Priscilla's house took 40 minutes. Solomon drove. Ivory sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar streets pass like scenes from someone else's life. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning." She told him. The traffic stop, Heather Dunning's 911 call, the fabricated charges, the threats, the administrative leave from work, the IA complaint, the meeting with Ronan Weeks. He listened without interrupting, his face revealing nothing. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You documented everything." "Everything I could." "Including audio?" She glanced at him. "How did you know?" "Because I taught you to document, and because you're too calm for someone without a backup plan." He changed lanes, signaling precisely. "Where is it?" "Cloud storage. Automatic backup. They don't know it exists." "Good." He nodded slowly. "That recording is your leverage. Don't play it until you have to." "Dad, what's going to happen now?" He was quiet for a moment. "Now the system is going to do what it does when powerful people get involved. It's going to protect itself. They'll offer settlements, transfers, early retirements. They'll announce policy reviews and enhanced training. They'll make it look like they're fixing the problem while making sure the problem never gets publicly named. So nothing changes. Some things change. Small things. Slow things." He pulled onto Priscilla's street. "The question is whether you want to push for more." "What does pushing for more look like?" "Federal involvement, civil rights investigation, your name in the news, your face on camera." He parked in front of Priscilla's house but didn't cut the engine. "It would help others. It might change policy, but it would cost you. Privacy, peace, maybe safety." Ivory looked at the house. Through the window, she could see Priscilla moving in the kitchen. Somewhere inside, Willow was waiting. "Let me think about it." "Take all the time you need." Solomon turned off the car. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Willow didn't let go for 11 minutes. She attached herself to Ivory the moment the door opened and refused to release her grip, arms locked around her mother's waist, face buried in her stomach. "I called Grandpa," she said, voice muffled. "Just like you said." "I know, baby. You did so good." "The lady wanted to take me again, but Miss Priscilla said no." Ivory looked up at Priscilla, who stood in the kitchen doorway with wet eyes. "What happened?" "DSS workers showed up about an hour after they took you," Priscilla said. "Had papers, said they needed to do a welfare check. I told her Willow was in my custody as emergency contact, and if she wanted to take that child, she'd need a judge's order and a police escort." The older woman's jaw tightened. "She left." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just tell me what you're going to do about those people." Ivory looked down at her daughter, still clinging, still trembling. "I'm going to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." 3 days later, the FOIA results arrived. Ronan Weeks had filed the request 2 weeks earlier, before Ivory's second arrest. The response came in a thick manila envelope, delivered to his office at the Piedmont Observer. He called Ivory that evening. "You need to see this." They met at the same coffee shop in Raleigh. Weeks spread the documents across the table: emails, internal memos, incident reports. "The department redacted about 30% of it," he said. "But what they left is damning." He pointed to an email dated October 15th from G. Pruitt at crestwoodpd.gov to Grow at crestwoodpd.gov. Subject line, R.E. Mercer complaint. Ivory read aloud, voice low. "Captain, situation is escalating. She's talking to press. Filed formal I.A. complaint. Recommend we contain this before it reaches state-level oversight. She's got connections we don't know about." "They knew," Weeks said. "They knew you were a threat, and they coordinated a response." The next email was Rowe's reply, same day. "Handle it. Use child services angle if needed. Document everything. Make sure this looks procedural." Ivory felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not surprise. She'd known, on some level, that this was coordinated. But seeing it in writing, in their own words, made it real in a way that suspicion never could. "There's more," Weeks said. He pulled out another document, a memo from the IT department regarding dashcam footage from October 8th. 4 minutes and 17 seconds of footage from Officer Voss's vehicle are listed as corrupted due to technical malfunction. Weeks tapped the page. But the access log shows the file was downloaded twice after the incident. Once by Voss himself, once by someone with administrator credentials. Someone deleted it. Someone tried to. But here's the thing. The log shows an external access attempt at 11:47 p.m. on October 9th, an IP address that doesn't belong to the department. Someone outside the system tried to access the footage? Or did access it? Weeks leaned forward. "Ms. Mercer, I don't know who that was, but someone was watching this case before it ever became public." Ivory thought about her father, about his calls, about the people he knew and the systems he understood. "What do we do with this?" "I write the story. Everything I can verify, everything I can source. It runs next week." He paused. "Unless you want to stop me." "Why would I want to stop you?" "Because once this goes public, there's no going back. You become the face of this case, the target of people who don't want this story told." She thought about Willow, about the fear in her daughter's eyes, about the cost of silence and the cost of speech. "Run it." The story went live on Tuesday. Pattern of practice, Crestwood County. PD faces scrutiny. After internal emails surface. Ronan Weeks's byline sat below a headline that would eventually be shared 47,000 times. The article named names: Voss, Stokes, Pruitt, Rowe. It detailed 6 cases stretching back 24 months. It quoted the emails directly, the ones that talked about containment and making things look procedural. It did not name Ivory directly. She was identified only as a Crestwood County resident whose recent arrest sparked the investigation. But in a town the size of Crestwood, anonymity was a polite fiction. By Wednesday morning, everyone knew. Her phone rang constantly. Media requests, interview offers, a producer from a national news program asking if she'd consider sharing her story on a larger platform. She declined them all. On Thursday, Raymond Cole called. "Ivory, I saw the news." "I imagine you did. I want you to know, the company we're not taking any position on—" He struggled, words tangling. "What I mean is, your job is still here, when this settles down." "I appreciate that, Raymond." "Do you? Because I know how this looked. The leave, the way it was handled. You did what you had to do. I don't blame you." Silence on the line. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for all of it." She believed him. It didn't matter. "I'll let you know about the job." The administrative hearing was scheduled for November 15th, 3 weeks after the story broke, 6 weeks after the first arrest. It would be held in the Crestwood County Administrative Building, in a conference room converted into a hearing chamber. The panel would consist of 3 officials: the county HR director, an outside attorney hired for impartiality, and a representative from the North Carolina Police Benevolent Association. Ivory arrived at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes early. She wore her second-best suit, the same one she'd worn to her IA interview, the same one she'd worn to work the day before her world collapsed. Her father sat beside her. He'd offered to stay away, to avoid the appearance of influence, but she'd asked him to come. "I need you there," she'd said, "not as a general, as my dad." He'd nodded and said nothing else. The hearing room was already half full. Reporters filled the back rows, Ronan Weeks among them, notebook open. Department representatives sat on one side, Voss, Stokes, and Pruitt in uncomfortable chairs, their union lawyer beside them. Rowe was absent. Administrative leave pending separate review, according to the official statement. Detective Tabitha Crane sat near the front, a thick folder in her lap. She'd been called as the IA investigator, required to present her findings. At 9 a.m. exactly, the hearing officer called the room to order. This hearing is to review allegations of misconduct against Officer Bradley Voss, Officer Connor Stokes, and Sergeant Floyd Pruitt. She was a woman in her 50s, with gray hair and the practiced neutrality of someone who'd presided over hundreds of such proceedings. "Ms. Mercer, you may present your statement." Ivory stood. The room went quiet. "Thank you." She opened her folder, the same folder she'd prepared for the IA interview, now expanded with new documents. "I'd like to submit the following into evidence." She read each item aloud, her voice steady. Item 1. Audio recording, 18 minutes and 43 seconds, captured on my personal device beginning at 6:52 p.m. on October 8th. The recording includes the entire duration of my initial traffic stop. A murmur ran through the room. Voss's face went pale. Item 2. FOI. A response dated October 22nd, including internal emails between Sergeant Pruitt and Captain Rowe discussing strategy to contain my complaint. Item 3. DSS records showing no prior complaints or investigations regarding my daughter, and a notation from caseworker Meredith Thorne stating, she read from the document, "Referral appears to lack substantive basis. Recommend closure." Item 4. Chain of custody documentation for the dashcam footage. IT logs show the file was accessed twice after the incident, once by Officer Stokes, once by an administrator account. The second access occurred 3 hours before the malfunction was reported. She set down the folder. "I have one more item." She pulled out a small device, her phone, and pressed play. Voss's voice filled the room. "Lady, you want to do this the easy way or the hard way?" "Because I've got all night, and something tells me you don't." Then Ivory's voice, calm. "Officer, I was parked on a public street, within the posted time limit. My vehicle is registered, my license is valid, and I haven't been informed of any traffic violation that would warrant a search." Then Voss again. "Sounds like law school talk. You a lawyer?" "I'm a citizen who knows her rights." "Yeah? Well, I'm a cop who knows what I smell." "And what do you smell?" "Suspicion." The recording continued, every threat, every violation, every moment of an arrest that should never have happened. When it ended, the room was silent. Voss stood abruptly. That's not how it happened. That recording is edited, manipulated." "Sit down, Officer Voss." The hearing officer's voice was ice. "You'll have your opportunity to respond. This is the moment everything turns. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the time." The hearing lasted 4 hours. Voss's lawyer argued procedure, argued discretion, argued that, in the heat of the moment, language sometimes became imprecise. Crane presented the IA findings, procedural violations, contradictory statements, evidence of coordination between officers. The union representative pushed back. These were dedicated officers with years of service, being railroaded by media attention. Through it all, Ivory sat silent, watching the machine grind. At 1:15 p.m., the hearing officer called for a recess. When they reconvened at 2, she read the preliminary findings. Based on the evidence presented, this panel finds sufficient cause to recommend the following. Officer Bradley Voss, suspended without pay pending completion of a full internal investigation. Sergeant Floyd Pruitt, suspended without pay pending completion of a full internal investigation. Officer Connor Stokes, placed on administrative leave with pay pending investigation. Voss slammed his fist on the table. This is garbage. This is political. Officer Voss, you will control yourself or you will be removed. He sat, fuming. The hearing officer continued. Additionally, this panel recommends referral of this matter to the U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, for consideration of a pattern or practice investigation under 42 U.S.C. Section 14,141. The words hung in the air. Pattern or practice. Not one incident. A system. That evening, Ivory sat on Priscilla's porch with her father. Willow was inside, watching a movie she'd seen 12 times before. The familiar sounds of animated dialogue drifted through the screen door. "You did good today," Solomon said. "It doesn't feel like good." Justice never feels like good. It feels like exhaustion. She watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. What happens now? DOJ reviews the referral. If they open a full investigation, federal monitors could be appointed. The department could face consent decrees, mandatory reforms, oversight, reporting requirements. And the officers? Suspension isn't termination. The union will fight. Some will be reinstated. Some will transfer to other departments. He paused. Rowe will probably retire. Full pension, no formal discipline on his record. That's not justice. No, it's not. He turned to look at her. But 6 months ago, they were operating with impunity. No oversight, no consequences, no one watching. Now they're under federal review. Their names are in the news. The next time they pull someone over for suspicious behavior, they'll think twice. And the next department, the next officer, the next person who doesn't have a father with connections? Solomon was quiet for a long moment. That's why what you did matters, Ivory. Not because it fixed everything, because it made fixing things possible. 2 months later, the world looked different. Ivory had taken a new job in Raleigh, further from Crestwood, further from the memories. The commute was longer, but the distance felt necessary. Every time she drove through those quiet streets, past the sign for Magnolia Lane, she felt the weight of what had happened there. Willow had adjusted mostly. There were still nightmares sometimes, still moments when sirens made her freeze. But children were resilient in ways adults had forgotten how to be. She'd started at a new school, made new friends, begun to rebuild the sense of safety that had been shattered. The DSS case had been formally closed. Insufficient evidence. The same phrase that had protected officers for years now protected her daughter. She didn't know whether to be grateful or disgusted. The Department of Justice had opened a preliminary inquiry, not a full investigation, not yet. The language was careful, hedging. The department is examining whether there are patterns of conduct that may violate federal civil rights laws. No determination had been made, no timeline had been set. But something had shifted. Ronan Weeks sent her updates every few weeks. Other victims had come forward. People who'd seen the news coverage and recognized their own experiences. 7 new complaints had been filed, all against officers in the same unit. The ACLU had announced they were monitoring the situation. Bradley Voss remained suspended. His union had filed grievances, claiming the discipline violated collective bargaining agreements. The case was mired in administrative procedure, hearings scheduled and rescheduled, the machinery of bureaucracy grinding slow. Floyd Pruitt had taken stress-related medical leave, full pay, full benefits, a doctor's note that would keep him off duty indefinitely while technically remaining employed. Connor Stokes had returned to work after 30 days, transferred to an administrative position processing parking tickets. His body camera footage from that night, the only footage that had survived, was still under review. Captain Gaston Rowe had announced his voluntary retirement in late November. The press release praised his 32 years of dedicated service and wished him well in his future endeavors. No mention was made of the investigation, the emails, or the woman he'd threatened in a holding cell. He would receive his full pension, $117,000 per year for the rest of his life. December brought cold and the strange limbo of holidays. Ivory's father visited for Christmas, the first time in 3 years he'd been able to clear his schedule for the full week. They cooked together in her small Raleigh kitchen, Willow helping with tasks carefully chosen to minimize mess. On Christmas Eve, after Willow was asleep, they sat together in the living room. "There's something I need to tell you," Solomon said. Ivory set down her wine glass. "What?" "The external IP address. The one that accessed the dash cam footage before it was corrupted." "You found out who it was?" He nodded slowly. "It was one of my people. Someone I'd asked to keep an eye on the situation after you mentioned the traffic stop." "You were monitoring me?" "I was protecting you." He met her eyes. "The same way I've always protected you, even when you didn't know I was doing it." She felt something complicated move through her. Anger, gratitude, violation, love. What did they do with the footage? "Preserved it, the original file, before anyone else could alter it." He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and set it on the table. "If you ever need it." She stared at the drive. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I didn't want you to feel like you'd won because of me. What you did, the documentation, the recording, the courage to stand up, that was all you. My people just made sure the evidence couldn't disappear." "Does anyone else know?" "No, and no one will unless you decide to use it." She picked up the drive, felt its negligible weight in her palm. "Thank you, Dad." "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll be careful." "Careful of what?" "Of what comes next." What came next arrived on January 3rd. Ivory was at her desk in Raleigh, reviewing quarterly projections, when an envelope appeared in her mail slot. No return address. Postmark, Washington, D.C. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A photocopy of something. A memo maybe, or an email, with the letterhead and most identifying information carefully cut away. The text read, "Subject, Crestwood situation. Mercer case has drawn unwanted federal attention. Recommend we accelerate timeline for Phase 2 in adjacent jurisdictions before pattern becomes undeniable. R.C. R.C. She didn't know anyone with those initials. Didn't know what Phase 2 meant or what adjacent jurisdictions referred to. But she knew what the message meant. Someone wanted her to know that her case wasn't unique. That what had happened to her was part of something larger, something planned, something extending beyond Crestwood County's borders. And someone, she didn't know who, was trying to help her see it. She photographed the document, uploaded it to her secure cloud storage, and placed the original in the folder that now lived in her desk drawer. The folder that held the audio recording, the FOIA documents, the chain of custody logs, the flash drive her father had given her. Evidence. Always evidence. That evening, she called Ronan Weeks. "I received something today." She described the document, read him the text. Weeks was quiet for a long moment. R.C. could be anyone. Could be Rowe himself trying to muddy the waters. His initials are G.R. Could be a partner, a superior, someone in the state capitol. She heard him typing. Adjacent jurisdictions. That suggests this isn't limited to Crestwood. There might be a network. Can you look into it? I can try. But without more information, I'm fishing blind. He paused. Whoever sent you that document, they're either an ally or they're setting a trap. How do I know which? You don't. Not until you follow the thread and see where it leads. 2 weeks later, the Crestwood County Board of Supervisors held a public meeting. The agenda included a policy review of the police department, prompted by the DOJ inquiry, the media coverage, and the growing public pressure. The meeting room was packed. Residents, reporters, activists, officers' family members. Tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. Ivory sat in the back, anonymous as she could manage. She hadn't planned to speak, but when public comment opened and person after person approached the microphone, some defending the police, some demanding accountability, some simply expressing fear, she felt something shift inside her. She stood, walked to the microphone, waited for the room to notice. "My name is Ivory Mercer." The murmuring stopped. 2 months ago, I was arrested for the crime of sitting in my car on a public street. My daughter was threatened with removal from my custody. My job was put at risk. My life was turned upside down. She looked at the board members, 5 faces showing varying degrees of discomfort. "I'm not here to ask for justice. Justice, in this system, is a negotiation. It's bargained and compromised and delayed until it becomes meaningless. I'm here to tell you what I want instead. I want body cameras that cannot be turned off. I want civilian oversight with actual power. I want traffic stop data published monthly with demographic breakdowns that let the public see who's being stopped and why. I want officers who lie in reports to face the same consequences as civilians who lie to officers. I want you to understand that what happened to me is not unusual. It's ordinary. It's Tuesday. It's what happens to black mothers in this county every week, every month, every year. Documented or not, reported or not, survived or not. I want you to be uncomfortable, because until you're uncomfortable, nothing changes." She stepped back from the microphone. The room was silent. Then from somewhere in the back, someone began to clap. One person, then another, then a dozen. The applause spread through the room like fire, not unanimous, not unchallenged, but present, real. Ivory returned to her seat, heart pounding, hands steady. The board chairman cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ms. Mercer. The board will take your comments under advisement." Under advisement. The same phrase they used for everything they intended to ignore. But this time, with federal monitors watching and reporters recording and residents demanding accountability, under advisement might actually mean something. Might. March arrived with the first hints of spring and the final resolution of the administrative cases. Bradley Voss was terminated, not for the arrest itself, but for failure to maintain equipment, the non-functioning body camera, and providing inconsistent statements during investigation. The distinction mattered. It allowed the department to claim accountability while avoiding admission of civil rights violations. He appealed. The appeal was denied. He filed a lawsuit claiming wrongful termination. The lawsuit would take years to resolve. Floyd Pruitt never returned from medical leave. In February, he submitted his resignation, effective immediately, with full benefits and no disciplinary notation in his file. He would be eligible for employment at any other department in the state. Connor Stokes remained employed, processing parking tickets. His transfer request to patrol duty was denied. His career effectively was over, but he would continue to collect a paycheck and build toward his pension. The Crestwood County Board of Supervisors announced a comprehensive reform initiative. The initiative included mandatory body cameras for all patrol officers, pending budget approval, quarterly publication of traffic stop data, format to be determined, and an enhanced civilian review board with advisory capacity only, no disciplinary authority. The DOJ preliminary inquiry remained ongoing. No timeline for completion had been announced. On a Saturday in late March, Ivory took Willow to a park in Raleigh. Not the park near their old townhouse. That was contaminated now, associated with surveillance and suspicion. A new park in their new city, with swings and slides and the promise of fresh starts. Willow ran ahead, making friends with the easy confidence of childhood. Ivory sat on a bench, watching, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. She'd lost things. Her sense of safety, her belief that following rules protected you, Her faith that systems could self-correct without pressure. She'd gained things too. Her voice, her visibility, her understanding of how power worked and what it cost to challenge it. The phone in her pocket buzzed. A text from Ronan Weeks. New development. "Can you talk tomorrow?" She typed back, "Call me." The response came immediately. "It's about RC, I found something." They met the next morning at a restaurant in Durham, neutral ground, away from both their regular locations. Weeks looked tired, the kind of tired that came from too many late nights chasing threads that didn't want to be followed. "RC," he said without preamble. "I've been digging for weeks. At first I thought it was someone in Crestwood, Rose Circle, maybe a supervisor I hadn't identified. But the more I looked, the more I realized the network extends further." He pulled out a folder. "Robert Callahan. He's a consultant. Advises police departments on community relations and media management." "I've never heard of him." "You wouldn't have. He operates behind the scenes. But his firm, Strategic Response Associates, has contracts with 14 police departments in North Carolina alone." Weeks tapped the folder. "Including Crestwood." "What does he do for them?" "Officially, training, crisis communications, reputation management." Weeks leaned forward. "Unofficially? He helps departments coordinate responses to complaints, develops strategies to minimize liability, advises on how to handle problem cases. Problem cases like mine. Problem cases like yours." Weeks nodded. "The email you received. Accelerate timeline for Phase 2. I think that's his language. I've found similar phrasing in other documents. He's been building something. A playbook. A way to make complaints disappear before they become patterns." "Why would someone send me evidence of that?" "Because not everyone in his network agrees with his methods." Weeks pulled out another document. "I got this from a source inside one of the other departments. It's a training memo. Look at the language." She read, "When facing complaints from high-visibility demographics, documentation must be comprehensive and proactive. Establish narrative before subject can establish counter-narrative. Utilize collateral systems, DSS, employers, community networks, to apply pressure without direct departmental involvement." "They're teaching this," Ivory said slowly. "They're teaching cops how to destroy people's lives without leaving fingerprints." "Yes. And Callahan is behind it." "He's part of it. Whether he's the leader or just a node in something larger, I don't know yet." Weeks closed the folder. "But I'm going to find out." The investigation continued through spring and into summer. Weeks published 3 more articles, each one peeling back another layer. Other journalists picked up the story. Civil rights organizations filed FOIA requests. State legislators announced hearings. Robert Callahan denied everything. His lawyers sent cease and desist letters. His firm threatened lawsuits. But the documents kept emerging, the sources kept talking, and the pattern kept becoming clearer. In July, the Department of Justice upgraded its Crestwood inquiry to a full investigation. The announcement cited substantial evidence of systemic violations and promised a report within 18 months. In August, 3 more departments in North Carolina severed their contracts with Strategic Response Associates. 2 of them announced internal reviews of practices adopted during Callahan's tenure. In September, Ivory received another envelope. Same format as before. No return address, DC postmark, single sheet of paper inside. This one contained only a sentence. "Thank you for not stopping." No signature, no initials, no indication of who had sent it or why. But whoever they were watching, and they wanted her to know. October 8th marked 1 year since the traffic stop that had changed everything. Ivory spent the day at home with Willow. No commemorations, no interviews. Just normalcy. Breakfast, school, homework, dinner, bedtime. But after Willow was asleep, she sat alone in the kitchen, thinking about time and justice, and the strange paths that led from one to the other. Her phone rang. Her father's number. "Hey, Dad." Hey, sweetheart. How are you doing? I'm okay. Just reflecting. On the anniversary? On everything. Silence on the line. The comfortable silence of people who understood each other. I'm proud of you, Solomon said. I don't say that enough, but I am. For what? For not letting them break you. For fighting even when it would have been easier to stop. For being the person who makes things change instead of the person things happen to. She felt tears prick at her eyes. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You made the hard one. It's not over. It's never over. His voice was gentle. That's the thing about justice, Ivory. It's not a destination. It's a direction. You point yourself toward it, and you keep walking, even when the road doesn't end. What if I'm tired? Then you rest, and then you keep walking. She smiled despite herself. You sound like a fortune cookie. I sound like a man who's been fighting systems longer than you've been alive. A pause. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's another day. I love you, Dad. I love you too. The final resolution, such as it was, came in December, 14 months after the arrest. The DOJ investigation produced a 63-page report. It found substantial evidence of discriminatory policing practices in Crestwood County. It documented coordinated efforts to suppress complaints and inadequate oversight mechanisms. It recommended immediate implementation of consent decree provisions and appointment of federal monitors for a period of not less than 3 years. Crestwood County signed the consent decree on December 15th. Under its terms, the department would implement body camera requirements, civilian oversight boards with actual authority, demographic tracking of all traffic stops, and mandatory retraining for all officers. Progress would be monitored quarterly. Failure to comply could result in direct federal intervention. It was, by any measure, a victory. But victory tasted different than Ivory had expected. Not sweet, not satisfying, just heavy. The weight of knowing how much had been required to achieve how little. Bradley Voss found work at a security firm in Tennessee. Floyd Pruitt moved to Florida, where his resignation without discipline made him eligible for law enforcement employment. Gaston Rowe published an op-ed in a conservative magazine warning about the dangers of federal overreach in local policing. Robert Callahan's firm eventually folded, but Callahan himself emerged unscathed. He was last seen consulting for a think tank in Virginia, writing papers about community relations best practices. The system had bent, but it had not broken. On the 1-year anniversary of the consent decree signing, Ivory received an invitation. The Crestwood County Board of Supervisors was hosting a community reconciliation event. She was asked to speak. She almost declined. What more was there to say? What difference would more words make? But she thought about the people who would be in that room, the residents who had watched what happened to her and recognized their own experiences, the officers who would have to live with new rules they hadn't asked for, the politicians who would claim credit for reforms they had resisted at every step. She thought about her father's words. You point yourself toward justice, and you keep walking. She said yes. The event was held in the same conference room where her administrative hearing had taken place. Same chairs, same table, same fluorescent lights. But the faces were different. The tension was different. Ivory stood at the podium, looking out at a room full of people who had been forced to reckon with something they would have preferred to ignore. A year ago, she began, this county signed a consent decree, a piece of paper that promised change. She paused. Paper doesn't change anything. People do. Systems don't reform themselves. People reform them. One decision, one policy, one interaction at a time. I'm not here to celebrate. The officers who violated my rights are not in prison. The captain who threatened my daughter is collecting his pension. The consultant who taught them how to destroy lives is still advising police departments in other states. But I'm also not here to despair, because something did change. Not everything, not enough, but something. The next black mother who gets pulled over in Crestwood County will be on camera. The next complaint that gets filed will be reviewed by civilians, not just officers. The next pattern of practice will be visible to federal monitors who have the power to intervene. That's not justice, it's the possibility of justice. It's a door that wasn't there before. I can't tell you what comes through that door. That's up to you. The residents who demand accountability, the officers who choose integrity, the leaders who prioritize people over politics. What I can tell you is this. I'm still here. My daughter is still here. And we're still watching. She stepped back from the podium. The applause was not thunderous. It was scattered, uncertain, the sound of a community that hadn't yet decided what it wanted to be. But it was there, and that was a start. Afterward, Detective Tabitha Crane approached her in the parking lot. Mrs. Mercer. The same respectful tone she'd used from the beginning. I wanted to thank you. For what? For not giving up. For making us do our jobs even when we didn't want to. Crane glanced back at the building. I know it doesn't feel like enough. I know the outcomes weren't what you deserved, but what you did, it changed things here, for real. Will it last? I don't know. Crane's honesty was stark. Consent decrees expire. Monitors go away. People forget. She met Ivory's eyes. But we remember. The officers who do this job because we believe in it. We remember what happens when the badge becomes a weapon instead of a shield. I hope that's enough. So do I. The drive home took 45 minutes. Ivory pulled into her driveway as the sun was setting, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and purple she'd watched from Priscilla's porch a year ago. Willow was at the window, waiting. 8 years old now, taller, more serious. She'd lost something that October night. A child's unquestioning trust in the world's fairness. But she'd gained something too. An understanding of strength. A mother who stood up when standing up cost everything. Ivory waved. Willow waved back. Inside, the house was warm. Dinner was in the oven. A casserole she'd prepared that morning, knowing she'd be too drained to cook after the event. How was it? Willow asked. Hard, but good. Did they clap? Some of them. Were you scared? Ivory thought about the question, about all the fear she'd carried for 2 years, and all the fear she'd learned to carry differently. A little, but I did it anyway. Willow nodded, as if this made perfect sense. That's what brave means, she said. You told me, being scared but doing it anyway. That's right, baby. They ate dinner together, talking about school and friends, and the ordinary rhythms of ordinary life. After Willow went to bed, Ivory sat alone in the living room, thinking about endings and beginnings and the space between them. The folder was still in her desk drawer, the audio recording, the documents, the flash drive, the anonymous messages. She didn't know what she would do with them, didn't know if there would be a next chapter to this story, or if this was the end. But she knew one thing. Whatever came next, she would be ready. She'd been raised to be ready. 3 months later, spring returned. Ivory was gardening in her front yard, a new hobby, something to do with her hands besides type and document and fight, when a car pulled up to the curb. The driver was a woman she didn't recognize, young, black, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she'd rehearsed this moment. Ms. Mercer? Ivory set down her trowel. Yes? My name is Jasmine Howard. I'm from Mecklenburg County. The woman took a breath. I read about what you did. In Crestwood. And I think the same thing is happening to me. The words landed like stones in still water. What do you mean? I was pulled over 3 weeks ago for a broken tail light that wasn't broken. They said my son was unattended in the back seat. They threatened to call DSS. Her voice cracked. I didn't know what to do. But then I found your story, and I thought, maybe you could help. Ivory looked at this woman, this stranger who had driven an hour to find her, who carried the same fear she recognized from her own mirror. She thought about rest, about peace, about the life she'd been trying to rebuild. Then she thought about doors, about the ones that hadn't existed before and the ones that still needed to be opened. "Come inside," she said. "Tell me everything." The conference room smelled of stale coffee and exhaustion. Ivory sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by faces she had come to know over the past year and a half. Jasmine Howard on her left, now a paralegal student at Wake Forest. Ronan Weeks on her right, his notebook open to a page filled with shorthand only he could decipher. 6 other women lined the remaining chairs, each one a survivor, each one a story, each one a thread in a pattern that stretched across 3 states. "The DOJ report drops tomorrow," Weeks said. "My sources say it's comprehensive. 14 departments named. Callahan's network mapped in detail." "And Callahan himself?" "Still consulting, still collecting checks." Weeks shrugged. "But his client list has shrunk by 60%. Most departments won't touch him now." It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it was something. Ivory looked around the table at the women who had found her, or whom she had found, over the 18 months since Jasmine appeared in her driveway. Each had a version of the same story. Pretextual stops, fabricated charges, threats involving children or jobs or immigration status. Each had been isolated, silenced, made to feel alone in their suffering. They weren't alone anymore. The organization had started small. After Jasmine's visit, Ivory had spent weeks helping her navigate the complaint process, the same maze she had walked herself, now familiar enough to guide others through. When Jasmine's case attracted media attention, 2 more women reached out, then 5 more, then a dozen. By summer, Ivory realized she needed structure. She couldn't help everyone from her kitchen table, couldn't answer every email while working full-time and raising Willow. Her father had offered to fund a formal organization. She'd refused at first. This was her fight, not his money to spend. But he'd worn her down with logic she couldn't argue against. "You can help 10 people alone, or you can help hundreds with resources. Pride isn't a strategy, Ivory. It's a luxury." The Mercer Justice Initiative launched in September, operating out of a donated office space in Durham. The mission was simple: document, connect, advocate. Help victims of police misconduct navigate systems designed to exhaust them. Build patterns from isolated incidents. Make the invisible visible. Within 6 months, they had files on over 200 cases across North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Within a year, they had partnered with 3 civil rights organizations, 2 law school clinics, and a network of journalists who shared information across state lines. The work was endless. The progress was glacial. But the pattern was undeniable. "We need to talk about the hearing next week," Jasmine said, pulling Ivory back to the present. The hearing. The North Carolina Legislative Committee on Criminal Justice Reform had scheduled 3 days of testimony on police accountability. Ivory had been invited to speak, not as a victim this time, but as an expert, the founder of an organization that had become, almost accidentally, a clearinghouse for misconduct data across the region. "I've prepared my statement," Ivory said. 20 minutes on the pattern of practice evidence. 10 minutes on recommended reforms. They're going to push back. This from Denise Washington, a former teacher from Fayetteville whose son had been arrested for resisting arrest during a traffic stop that left him with a broken wrist. "The police union has been lobbying hard. They're calling us anti-cop activists." "Let them call us whatever they want." Ivory's voice was calm. "We have the data. We have the documentation. We have 200 families who can testify to what happened to them." "Data doesn't always win," Jasmine said quietly. "We learned that the hard way." She was right. Data hadn't saved Jasmine's brother, who had taken a plea deal rather than risk trial on charges everyone knew were fabricated. Data hadn't stopped the officers who arrested Denise's son from receiving commendations the following year. Data hadn't prevented the dozens of cases that had been settled quietly, with ND as that silenced victims in exchange for modest payments. But data was what they had, so data was what they would use. The night before the hearing, Ivory couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through her testimony in her head. The statistics, the case studies, the policy recommendations. She knew the material cold, had lived it, breathed it, built an organization around it. But knowing wasn't the same as believing it would matter. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. Always have been, always will be." She smiled despite herself. Solomon Mercer had become an unexpected ally in this work, not through his connections, which he deployed sparingly and strategically, but through his steady presence. He called every Sunday, visited every month, took Willow for weekends when Ivory needed to travel for the organization. He had never said, "I told you so," about the costs of visibility. Never pointed out that the quiet life she'd tried to build had been replaced by something louder, harder, more demanding. He simply showed up, again and again, the way he'd shown up at the police station 2 years ago. She typed back, "Thanks, Dad. See you tomorrow." He would be there, in the gallery, watching. He'd cleared his schedule, no small feat for someone still consulted on matters of national security. But family came first. It always had, even when his service had kept him away for months at a time. Ivory set down her phone and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come, whether she was ready or not. The hearing room was larger than she'd expected. Rows of chairs faced a raised platform where 7 legislators sat behind a curved desk. Cameras lined the walls, local news, C-SPAN, several independent journalists she recognized from previous coverage. The gallery was packed. Advocates, officers, families, reporters, curious citizens. Ivory sat in the witness section, reviewing her notes one final time. Beside her, Jasmine squeezed her hand. "You've got this." "I know." She didn't feel like she had anything. She felt like she was about to walk into a hurricane armed with the umbrella. But she'd felt that way before. In the holding cell, at the administrative hearing, at the community reconciliation event. Fear was familiar now. She'd learned to carry it without letting it carry her. The committee will now hear testimony from Ms. Ivory Mercer, founder and executive director of the Mercer Justice Initiative. She stood, walked to the witness table, sat down before the microphone. 7 faces looked back at her. 4 appeared neutral. 2 appeared skeptical. 1, a former prosecutor from Charlotte, appeared openly hostile. "Thank you for the opportunity to testify today," she began. "My name is Ivory Mercer. 2.5 years ago, I was arrested during a traffic stop for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. My 6-year-old daughter was threatened with removal by Child Protective Services. My career was disrupted. My life was turned upside down." She paused. "I am not unique. In the 18 months since I founded the Mercer Justice Initiative, we have documented 237 cases with similar patterns across North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. Pretextual stops, fabricated charges, coordinated retaliation against complainants, systematic use of collateral systems, child services, employers, immigration authorities, to pressure victims into silence." She laid out the data, the demographics, the geographic clusters, the officers whose names appeared again and again, transferred between departments, their records scrubbed clean with each move. "This is not about individual bad actors," she said. "This is about systems that protect misconduct and punish accountability. Systems that make it easier to destroy a citizen's life than to discipline an officer. Systems that treat complaints as threats to be managed rather than problems to be solved." The hostile legislator, Representative Marcus Webb, leaned forward. "Ms. Mercer, isn't it true that your organization has received funding from groups that have called for defunding the police?" "Our funding comes from foundations, individual donors, and legal settlements. Our position on police funding is that resources should be allocated effectively and with accountability. That's not defunding. That's good governance. And isn't it true that several of your cases involve individuals who were ultimately convicted of crimes?" "Some individuals we've worked with have criminal records, yes. That doesn't make their civil rights less valid. The Constitution doesn't have a character requirement. Webb's jaw tightened. You seem very confident in your data, Ms. Mercer, but data can be manipulated. Statistics can be misleading. They can, which is why we've made our methodology public. Every case in our database is documented with primary sources: arrest records, court filings, FOIA responses, audio and video evidence where available. We invite scrutiny. We welcome verification. Because unlike the departments we investigate, we have nothing to hide. The room was silent. Ivory continued for another 15 minutes, laying out specific policy recommendations: mandatory body cameras with tamper-proof storage, civilian oversight boards with subpoena power, a statewide database tracking officer misconduct across departments, whistleblower protections for officers who report wrongdoing. When she finished, the committee chair thanked her for her testimony. We have time for a few questions from the committee. The questions came. Some were softball, legislators who supported reform seeking sound bites. Some were hostile, Webb and one ally trying to paint her as an extremist. Some were substantive, genuine attempts to understand the scope of the problem and the feasibility of solutions. She answered them all, calmly, factually, without anger, without pleading, without the desperation that had characterized her early days in this fight. She had learned that emotion was a weapon the other side knew how to use against her. Facts were harder to dismiss. The hearing lasted 3 days. Other witnesses testified: police chiefs defending their departments, union representatives warning of dire consequences, victims telling stories that echoed Ivory's own. The coverage was extensive, the debate fierce, the outcome uncertain. 3 weeks later, the committee issued its recommendations. Mandatory body cameras with cloud storage, adopted. Statewide misconduct database, adopted, with amendments that weakened reporting requirements. Civilian oversight boards, recommended for further study. Whistleblower protections, tabled indefinitely. It was, like everything in this work, a partial victory. Progress, but not transformation. Movement, but not arrival. Ivory read the report in her office, surrounded by files that represented hundreds of lives disrupted, hundreds of families harmed, hundreds of stories that deserved better endings than the system was willing to provide. Jasmine knocked on the open door. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Ivory set down the report. I don't know what I thought. That if we just presented enough evidence, showed the pattern clearly enough, they'd have to act. Some of them did act. Some of them took the smallest possible step and called it reform. She rubbed her eyes. Webb is already talking about implementation challenges that will delay the body camera requirement by 2 years. The misconduct database has so many exceptions it'll be useless. So we keep pushing. We've been pushing for 2.5 years. When does pushing become enough? Jasmine sat down across from her. It doesn't. That's the thing I've learned from you, Ivory. There's no finish line. There's no moment when you get to stop and say, I won. There's just the work, day after day, case after case, inch by inch. That's exhausting. Yes, it is. Jasmine smiled slightly. But you know what's more exhausting? Pretending it's not happening. Living with the knowledge that people are being hurt and doing nothing about it. Ivory was quiet for a moment. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. 6 months after the legislative hearing, the federal investigation into Robert Callahan's network produced indictments. Not against Callahan himself. He remained frustratingly untouchable, protected by layers of consultants and contractors and legal distance, but against 3 police chiefs who had implemented his training protocols, against a city manager who had authorized payments to his firm while knowing about the misconduct it enabled, against 2 officers who had been recorded discussing how to make problems disappear. The indictments sent shockwaves through law enforcement circles. For the first time, there were federal consequences for the kind of coordinated misconduct the Mercer Justice Initiative had been documenting. Ivory watched the press conference from her office, surrounded by her team. When the U.S. attorney announced the charges, citing A pattern of civil rights violations enabled by systemic failures of accountability. Jasmine started crying. "That's our language," she said. "That's what we've been saying for 2 years." "They listened," Denise added. "They actually listened." Ivory didn't cry. She'd learned to hold her emotions at a distance, to process victories and defeats with the same measured calm. But she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. This was what it looked like when the work mattered. Not headlines or speeches or legislative hearings. Indictments. Consequences. The machinery of justice, finally, grinding forward. Willow turned 10 on a Saturday in March. The party was small. A few friends from school, Priscilla, Solomon, the members of Ivory's team who had become extended family over the years. They gathered in the backyard of the house Ivory had bought 6 months earlier, the first property she'd ever owned, purchased with savings and a small inheritance from her mother's estate. Watching Willow blow out candles, surrounded by people who loved her, Ivory felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of completion. The work would never be complete. But the peace of purpose. The peace that came from knowing she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to do. Her father appeared beside her. "She's growing up fast. Too fast. They all do." Solomon watched his granddaughter laughing with her friends. "You know, when you were her age, I was deployed more than I was home. Missed half her childhood, felt like." "You did what you had to do." "I did what I thought I had to do. Looking back, I'm not sure I made the right choices." He turned to face her. "You're making different choices, better ones. Being present for her while also doing the work. It's hard. Everything worth doing is hard." He smiled. "But you're handling it. You're handling all of it, and I've never been prouder." The night after the party, after everyone had gone home and Willow was asleep, Ivory sat on her porch with a glass of wine. The neighborhood was quiet. Ordinary. The kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happened. No traffic stops, no arrests, no midnight threats. Just families living their lives, children playing in yards, neighbors waving as they passed. She had chosen this place deliberately, far from Crestwood, far from the memories, far from the woman she had been before everything changed. But close enough to her work, to her team, to the mission that had become her life's purpose. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Phase 3 implementation delayed indefinitely. Network fragmenting. Thank you. No signature. No identification. Just confirmation that somewhere, someone was still watching, still helping, still working toward the same goals through channels she would never fully understand. She didn't reply. Didn't need to. The message was enough. 3 years after the traffic stop that changed everything, Ivory Mercer stood before a crowd of 500 people at a civil rights conference in Atlanta. The Mercer Justice Initiative had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. A staff of 12, partnerships with organizations in 6 states, a track record of documented cases that had influenced policy in dozens of jurisdictions, a reputation that made police departments nervous and victims hopeful. She was no longer the woman who'd been arrested for sitting in her car. She was a name, a face, a symbol of what ordinary people could accomplish when they refused to be silenced. "People ask me what victory looks like," she said, looking out at the crowd. "They expect me to describe a moment, a ruling, a verdict, a reform that fixed everything. But that's not how change works. Change is incremental, partial, frustrating." She paused. "Victory isn't a destination. It's a direction. It's the choice you make, every day, to keep walking toward justice, even when justice seems impossibly far away." 3 years ago, I was alone in a holding cell, wondering if I'd ever see my daughter again. Today, I stand before you representing hundreds of families who refused to be silenced, thousands of people who believed that documentation could become power, millions of citizens who are watching, waiting, demanding that the systems meant to protect us actually do their jobs. We haven't won. We won't win, not in any final sense. The fight for justice doesn't end. But we've proven something important, that the pattern can be interrupted, that the silence can be broken, that the machinery of oppression, however powerful, is not invincible. That's not victory, but it's hope, and sometimes hope is enough to keep walking. After the speech, a young woman approached her, early 20s, nervous, clutching a folder of papers. "Ms. Mercer, I'm sorry to bother you, but I drove 4 hours to be here, and I didn't know if I'd get another chance." Ivory recognized the look, the fear, the desperation, the hope that someone, somewhere, might believe her. "What's your name?" "Amber. Amber Townsend. I'm from a small town in Georgia, and something happened to me. Something that sounds exactly like what you described in your speech." Ivory took the folder. Inside, incident reports, medical records, the familiar documentation of a life disrupted by power wielded without accountability. "Tell me everything," she said. And Amber did, and the story continued.